My daughter kicked me out of the house after I refused to serve her mother-in-law like a maid. She's rich. Serve her plate and then go clean the bathroom. I cried in secret, but the action I took afterward left everyone horrified. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought my own daughter would make me feel so small. At 64, I thought I'd experienced every kind of hurt this world could offer. But standing in Vanessa's kitchen that evening, watching her fuss over preparations for Margaret's visit, I realized I was wrong. Mom, make sure the silverware is perfectly aligned, Vanessa called from the living room, where she was adjusting flowers for the third time. Margaret notices everything, and I need this dinner to be flawless. I ran my fingers along the gleaming forks and knives, making sure each piece sat exactly where it should. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the nervous energy that had been building all day. Margaret Langford, Nathan's mother, was coming for dinner. The woman who owned half the commercial real estate in our town, who drove a car worth more than most people's houses, and who had never spoken to me as anything more than an inconvenience in her son's life. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Margaret didn't believe in being fashionably late. "Get the door, Mom," Vanessa hissed, smoothing her black dress one final time. "And remember what we discussed?" What we discussed? The conversation from earlier that day still burned in my chest. Vanessa had sat me down like a child, receiving instructions. "Margaret expects a certain level of service when she dines," she'd said, not meeting my eyes. "Just be helpful, do whatever she needs." I opened the door to find Margaret standing there in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself like someone accustomed to taking up all the space in any room. "Mrs. Langford," I said softly, stepping aside, "please come in." She walked past me without acknowledgement, handing me her coat like I was the hired help. The weight of the expensive fabric in my arms felt heavier than it should have. Nathan appeared immediately, kissing his mother's cheek. "Mom, you look wonderful. How was the drive from the country club?" "Tedious," Margaret replied, settling into the wingback chair that Vanessa had specifically designated as hers. "The construction on Fish Street is absolutely barbaric. Someone should do something about it." I stood there, holding her coat, waiting for someone to tell me where to put it. When no one paid attention, I quietly hung it in the hall closet. Dinner began 20 minutes later. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing Margaret's favorite dishes: beef Wellington, roasted asparagus, and chocolate souffle. My feet ached from standing all day, but I had wanted everything perfect for Vanessa. "Gloria," Margaret said as I placed the salad course before her. It was the first time she'd said my name all evening. "This dressing is too taut." "I can make a fresh vinaigrette," I offered quickly. "No need," Vanessa interjected, shooting me a sharp look. "Mom will just use the regular ranch from the refrigerator." I nodded and headed to the kitchen, my cheeks burning. Ranch dressing from a bottle for the salad I'd spent an hour preparing with fresh herbs from my own garden. When I returned, Margaret was in the middle of a story about her recent cruise to the Mediterranean. "The service was impeccable. The staff anticipated every need before you even realize you had one. That's what proper service looks like." She glanced at me meaningfully as I set the ranch dressing beside her plate. The main course went no better. Margaret criticized the temperature of the beef, the seasoning on the asparagus, even the way I'd folded the napkins. Each comment felt like a small slap. But what hurt more was watching Vanessa agree with every criticism. "You're absolutely right, Margaret," when her mother-in-law complained that the wine glasses had water spots. "Mum, could you rewash these quickly?" I took the glasses to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I dried each one with a fresh towel. Through the doorway, I could hear them laughing about something. The sound felt sharp against my ears. By the time dessert was served, I felt like a ghost moving through someone else's house. When Margaret's coffee cup was empty, she simply held it up without looking at me, expecting it to be refilled. When she dropped her napkin, she waited for me to notice and replace it. The final blow came as dinner ended. "Gloria," Margaret said, standing and smoothing her silk blouse, "I'd like to freshen up before I leave. Please ensure the powder room is spotless." My heart stopped. She wanted me to clean the bathroom? Not just tidy up, clean it like hired help. I looked at Vanessa, waiting for her to intervene, to say something, anything to preserve what little dignity I had left. Instead, she smiled brightly. Of course, Margaret. Mom, make sure everything in there is perfect. Check the hand towels and make sure the mirror is streak-free. The words hung in the air like a poison cloud. My daughter, the child I had raised alone after her father left, the woman I had supported through college and her early married years, was asking me to scrub toilets for her mother-in-law's approval. I stood there for a moment, feeling every pair of eyes on me. Margaret was expectant, Nathan looked uncomfortable but said nothing, and Vanessa looked impatient as if I was being unreasonably slow to comply. "She's rich," Vanessa said, her voice taking on an edge when I didn't immediately move. "Serve her plate and then go clean the bathroom. This is important to us, Mom." The words cut deeper than any knife could have. I felt something break inside my chest, something that had been holding me together for years, but I nodded because what else could I do? This was my daughter's house, her marriage, her life I was supposedly helping to secure. I walked to the powder room with my cleaning supplies, my vision blurred by tears I refused to let fall. As I knelt beside the toilet with a scrub brush, I could hear them in the dining room, their voices warm and animated now that the uncomfortable moment had passed. But it was what I heard next that shattered what was left of my heart. "She's actually quite useful." Margaret's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "So obedient. You've trained her well." And then Vanessa's laugh. Bright, pleased, satisfied. She knows her place. It just took some time to get her there. I sat back on my heels, staring at the reflection in the toilet bowl I had just cleaned, and finally understood what I had become in my daughter's life. Not a mother, not family, just useful. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I had to grip the edge of the sink to steady myself. Was this what the rest of my life would look like? Being useful until I wasn't? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Margaret's words, "So obedient, you've trained her well," and Vanessa's laugh echoing through my mind like a cruel melody I couldn't shake. By morning, I had convinced myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Vanessa hadn't meant it the way it sounded. Maybe in the light of day, we could talk about what happened and find our way back to being mother and daughter instead of whatever we had become. I found Vanessa in her kitchen, still in her silk robe, scrolling through her phone while her coffee grew cold. She looked up when I entered, and for just a moment I saw something soft in her expression. Hope flickered in my chest. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said carefully, pouring myself a cup from the pot she had already made. "Thank you for letting me stay over. I was too tired to drive home last night." She nodded absently, returning to her phone. "Margaret texted this morning. She was very impressed with dinner." "That's wonderful," I said, sitting across from her at the kitchen island, my hands wrapped around the warm mug, seeking comfort. "Vanessa, I wanted to talk to you about last night." Her fingers stopped scrolling. "What about it?" I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. I felt a little uncomfortable with how things went, the way Margaret spoke to me and asking me to clean the bathroom. I trailed off, watching her face. Vanessa set her phone down with more warmth than necessary. "Uncomfortable, Mom? What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm your mother, not the hired help. I was happy to cook dinner and serve our guest, but when she started ordering me around and you encouraged it—" "Encouraged it?" Vanessa's voice rose an octave. "I was trying to make a good impression on my mother-in-law. Do you understand how important she is to our future? To Nathan's business connections? I understand that she's important to you, but I'm important too. I'm your mother." Vanessa stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "And as my mother, shouldn't you want what's best for me? Shouldn't you want to help me succeed?" "Of course I do." But nothing." She began pacing the kitchen, her robe billowing behind her. "Do you know what Margaret could do for us? She has connections with the planning commission, with the mayor's office. Nathan's architectural firm could get contracts worth millions if she puts in a good word." I stood there, At my daughter, the woman I had raised to be strong and independent, watching her reduce herself to a social climber. And you think the way to earn those connections is by humiliating your own mother? Humiliating? Vanessa spun to face me, her face flushed with anger. You think being asked to serve dinner and clean a bathroom is humiliating? Do you know what's actually humiliating, Mom? Having a mother who's so proud and stubborn that she can't see the bigger picture. The words hit me like a slap. Vanessa, please just listen to yourself. You're talking about treating me like a servant in your own home. And you're talking like someone who thinks she's too good to help her own daughter. Vanessa's voice had become shrill now. You know what your problem is, Mom? You've always been jealous. Jealous? I couldn't hide my shock. Jealous of what? Jealous of my success, of my marriage, of the life I've built. She was getting more agitated by the second. You never had any of this. Dad left you with nothing, and you've spent the rest of your life resenting anyone who has more than you do. The cruelty of it took my breath away. How can you say that to me? I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I gave up dating, gave up any chance at happiness of my own to make sure you had every opportunity. And now you want me to pay for that forever, Vanessa shot back. You want me to sacrifice my future because you made choices that didn't work out. I felt tears starting to sting my eyes, but I blinked them back. I want you to treat me with basic human dignity. Dignity? Vanessa laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mom, what do you actually bring to this family? What do you contribute? You don't have money like Margaret does. You don't have connections or influence. All you have to offer is service, and you can't even do that without complaining. Each word was like a nail being driven into my heart. This was my daughter. The baby I had rocked to sleep, the little girl whose scraped knees I had kissed better, the young woman whose dreams I had supported, even when they seemed impossible. I brought you love, I whispered. I brought you a mother's love. Love doesn't pay the bills, Mom. Love doesn't secure Nathan's future or mine. At that moment, Nathan appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, hair messed from sleep. He looked between us with obvious discomfort. Everything okay in here? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew it was. Vanessa turned to him immediately, her eyes pleading for backup. I was just explaining to Mom that we need her to be more accommodating when Margaret visits. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. Mom seemed a little tense last night, he said carefully. I mean, Margaret noticed. Noticed what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Just that you seemed resistant to helping out, Nathan said, not meeting my eyes. She mentioned that you didn't seem very happy about serving dinner. I stared at him in disbelief. I cooked for 6 hours. I served every course. I cleaned your bathroom with a scrub brush while you all sat comfortably in the dining room. But you did it with an attitude, Vanessa interjected. Margaret could tell you were unhappy about it. That made everyone uncomfortable. Of course I was unhappy about it, I snapped. The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. I was being treated like hired help in my own daughter's home. It's not your home, Mom, Vanessa said quietly, and that simple statement cut deeper than all her shouting had. This is my home, mine and Nathan's, and in our home, we need people who support our goals, not people who make things difficult. I felt the ground shifting beneath me. What are you saying? Vanessa and Nathan exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Then Vanessa straightened her shoulders and looked at me with the cold determination I recognized from her business dealings. I'm saying you need to decide what kind of relationship you want with us. If you want to be part of this family, you need to accept your role. Help when we ask for help, without complaints or drama. Make Margaret feel welcomed and respected when she visits. And if I don't? Another look passed between them. This time, Nathan spoke. Then maybe it's better if you don't visit when Margaret's here, he said softly. Maybe it's better if you take some time to think about what's really important. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I looked at my daughter, searching her face for any sign of the child I had loved so fiercely, the young woman I had sacrificed everything for. I saw a stranger. "So those are my choices?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Be your servant or be cut out of your life?" Vanessa's jaw tightened. "Don't be so dramatic, Mom. We're asking you to be helpful, to be part of the team." "The team," I repeated. "And what position am I playing on this team?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. I could see it in her eyes, in the set of her shoulders, in the way she looked at me like I was a problem to be solved rather than her mother. I was the help. Nothing more, nothing less. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 64 years in my aching bones. "I need to go home." "Mom!" Vanessa started, but I held up a hand. "I need to think," I said, "about what you've said, about what you're asking me to do." I walked upstairs to gather my overnight bag, my legs feeling heavy with each step. Behind me, I could hear them whispering, but I couldn't make out the words. Maybe I didn't want to. As I packed my few belongings, I caught sight of myself in Vanessa's guest room mirror. I looked old, tired, defeated. When had I become this person? When had I become someone who could be dismissed so easily by her own child? I was almost to my car when I heard the front door open behind me. "Mom, wait!" Vanessa called out. I turned, hoping against hope that she had come to apologize, to take back the horrible things she'd said, to remember that she loved me. Instead, she stood on her front porch in her expensive robe, looking like she was already regretting coming after me. "Just think about what we discussed, okay? This doesn't have to be complicated. We can still be a family." I looked at her, my beautiful, successful, and heartless daughter, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The last thread of hope I'd been clinging to finally snapped. "You're right," I said quietly. "It doesn't have to be complicated at all." I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing there on her perfect porch in her perfect neighborhood with her perfect life that had no room in it for a mother who wanted to be treated like more than furniture. But as I drove home to my small apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Something told me that the life Vanessa thought was so perfect was built on much shakier ground than she realized. The first 3 days after leaving Vanessa's house passed in a blur of sleepless nights and untouched meals. I kept replaying every moment of that awful dinner, every cruel word from the morning after, trying to understand how my relationship with my daughter had deteriorated so completely. My small one-bedroom apartment felt even smaller now, like a box I'd been shoved into and forgotten about. The silence was deafening. For years, even when Vanessa and I weren't speaking regularly, I always knew she was there, a phone call away, part of my life, part of my world. Now, that connection felt severed, and I wasn't sure how to exist without it. I wandered from room to room like a ghost, picking up books I couldn't concentrate on, starting household tasks I abandoned halfway through. The walls seemed to close in on me, filled with photographs of Vanessa at various stages of her life. Graduation pictures, wedding photos, holiday celebrations where we'd both been smiling and happy. Had it all been an act? Had she always seen me as a burden? As someone useful but ultimately disposable? On Thursday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold when my laptop chimed with an incoming email. I almost ignored it. Most of my correspondence these days was bills or advertisements, but something made me look. The sender was Dalton and Green, the accounting firm that handled the books for Vanessa's interior design business. I frowned, clicking it open. Why would they be contacting me directly? Then I remembered. When Vanessa had started her business 5 years ago, I'd helped her set it up. We'd listed me as a secondary contact for important financial documents, partly because she traveled frequently for client meetings, and partly because I'd helped her secure the initial startup loan. I was still officially listed as a partner, though I'd never taken an active role in the day-to-day operations. The email was routine, a monthly financial summary that I usually glanced at and deleted. But today, with nothing but time and heartache to fill my hours, I actually opened the attachment. At first, the columns of numbers meant nothing to me. Revenue, expenses, profit margins, all the dry details of running a business. But as I scrolled down to the transaction details, something caught my eye. There, in the deposit section, was a series of transfers that made my stomach clench. Large sums of money. $5,000 here, $8,500 there, $12,000 the month before. All coming from an account labeled M. Langford Personal. Margaret's money going into Vanessa's business account directly. I stared at the screen, feeling my pulse quicken. When had Margaret invested in Vanessa's business? In all our conversations about the company's growth, Vanessa had never mentioned taking on an investor, especially not her mother-in-law. The deposits were substantial and regular, dating back almost 8 months. But something felt wrong about it. The timing, the amounts, and the fact that these transfers seemed to accelerate around the same time that Vanessa had started putting pressure on me to be more accommodating during Margaret's visits. I clicked through to the previous month's report, then the one before that. The pattern was clear. Regular, significant transfers from Margaret's personal account to Vanessa's business account. But there was no corresponding documentation that I could see. No investment agreements, no partnership papers, no formal arrangements that would typically accompany such substantial financial backing. My hands were trembling as I reached for my phone. I still had contacts at the bank where Vanessa had her business accounts, people who knew me from when I'd helped her set everything up. Maybe they could provide some clarity. Mrs. Park, this is Gloria Garner-Hallows, business partner. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Sylvia Park had been Vanessa's business banker from the beginning. She was a kind woman in her 50s who had always been helpful during the startup process. Gloria, it's so good to hear from you. How are things going with the business? That's actually what I'm calling about, I said carefully. I was looking at our recent financial reports, and I noticed some large deposits from M. Langford. I wanted to make sure everything was properly documented on our end. There was a pause. Yes, the Langford transfers. Yes, those have been quite regular lately. Is there a problem with the documentation? Well, that's just it. I don't seem to have any records of an investment agreement or partnership arrangement with Mrs. Langford. I wanted to make sure we hadn't missed filing something important. Another pause. Longer this time. Gloria, I'm looking at the account notes here, and these transfers are listed as family contributions rather than formal investments. Vanessa told us they were gifts from her mother-in-law to help with business expansion. My blood ran cold. Gifts? That's what we have on file. Large family gifts to support the business. They're not structured as loans or investments, just contributions. I thanked Sylvia and hung up, my mind racing. Gifts. Margaret was supposedly giving Vanessa thousands of dollars every month as gifts. But that didn't make sense. From everything I'd observed about their relationship, Margaret was demanding and controlling, not generous and giving. She was the type of person who kept track of every favor, every kindness, expecting them to be repaid with interest. And there was something else nagging at me. During that awful dinner, when Margaret had been criticizing everything and treating me like hired help, I'd gotten the distinct impression that she enjoyed having power over people. She liked being the wealthy woman whose approval everyone sought. Would someone like that really be handing over thousands of dollars without expecting something significant in return? I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything I had just discovered. Vanessa hadn't just asked me to be more helpful around the house. She had deliberately tried to push me out. And now it seemed like Margaret had a financial hold over her, one that Vanessa was either too proud or too afraid to acknowledge. I got up around 4 a.m. and went back to the laptop. I pulled every single monthly report from Dalton and Green from the past year, tracing each deposit from Margaret's account. The amounts varied, but the pattern was unmistakable. It began shortly after Margaret's first extended visit. After that, the transfers grew larger and more frequent. I grabbed a notebook and began charting the timeline. Margaret visits, large deposit. Vanessa takes a luxury business trip, another deposit. Nathan's sudden kitchen remodel, a transfer 2 weeks earlier. Vanessa's new car, preceded by a $10,000 deposit. Margaret wasn't just helping out. She was buying her way into Vanessa's life, into her home, into her business. And the price of that help was me. I wanted to believe that Vanessa hadn't realized what she was doing, that it was all just a coincidence. But the cold, transactional nature of the deposits said otherwise. Margaret had bought influence, and Vanessa had sold access to her life, her company, and her mother's place in her home. The next morning, I made an appointment at Dalton and Green. I needed to speak with someone in person to get clear answers and determine what authority I still had over the company I had helped build. When I walked into the office lobby, a young receptionist greeted me with a cheerful, "Good morning. Welcome to Dalton and Green. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," I said. "I'm here to see Tara Myers." Tara was the firm's senior accountant and someone I had worked with directly during the company's founding. She came out moments later, her eyes lighting up with polite recognition. "Gloria! It's been a while. Please, come in." Her office was cozy, with warm lighting and framed degrees on the walls. She gestured for me to sit. "So, what can I help you with?" I took a deep breath. "I've been reviewing the company's finances and noticed significant deposits from Margaret Langford. I understand they've been categorized as gifts." Tara nodded. "That's what was entered. Vanessa told us they were personal contributions from her mother-in-law." "Did she provide any documentation to that effect?" "No," Tara said slowly. "That's unusual, actually. For large recurring transfers, we usually request a formal letter or documentation." "And what about my role in the company?" I asked. "Am I still listed as a legal partner?" Tara turned to her computer and began typing. After a moment, she looked up. "Yes, you're still listed as a silent partner with 25% ownership." I felt a flicker of relief. "Can that be changed without my consent?" "Not unless you sign a withdrawal or reassignment document, and we have no such document on file." I leaned forward. "So if Margaret is funding this company as an outside contributor and I'm still a legal partner, shouldn't I have been informed? Shouldn't her contributions be documented properly as either investments or gifts with tax implications?" Tara blinked, clearly uncomfortable. "Yes, you should have been informed. I'll be honest, Gloria, this setup isn't standard. If the IRS were to audit this account, these so-called gifts could raise questions, especially if there's any personal benefit being derived from them, like home renovations or travel expenses." I knew then what I had to do. "I want a full audit," I said. "Go back 12 months. I want everything traced. Margaret's deposits, how they were used, whether any of it was mixed with personal expenditures. I want every detail documented." Tara hesitated. "Are you sure? This could open a real can of worms." "I'm counting on it," I said. "Start with the month Margaret first visited and go forward from there. And don't alert Vanessa. I want this done discreetly." "Understood." As I left the office, my heart was pounding. For years, I had given Vanessa everything. My time, my money, my loyalty. I had supported her dreams at every turn. And now, she had tried to erase me to make room for a woman who was buying her way into a role that should have belonged to me. I wouldn't let it happen. A week later, Tara called with a preliminary audit report. What she told me nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. "Gloria," she said over the phone, "we found discrepancies. Big ones." Like what? For starters, Margaret's deposits weren't being used solely for business expenses. Large portions were transferred to a secondary personal account that Vanessa opened under a different name, Vanessa Harlow LLC. From there, she paid for home improvements, luxury purchases, even some private travel. "That's illegal," I said flatly. "It's at least a gray area. If the IRS audits this and sees gift money being funneled into private use while claiming it's for business, there will be penalties." "And she never reported any of this to me?" "No. In fact," Tara added carefully, "there's evidence she tried to remove your name from some internal documents, though none of it was filed legally. I think she was preparing to force you out entirely." I sat there, stunned. Why would she do this? I helped her build that business. I've never taken a cent in return. "I can't answer that," Tara said, "but I can tell you this. This isn't clean. And if Margaret is complicit, she could be implicated too." My hands trembled as I hung up the phone. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was potential financial fraud. And I was still tied to the company. If things went south, I could be held responsible. That night, I didn't sleep again. Instead, I pulled out every document I still had from the early days of the company: partnership agreements, initial funding statements, business registration forms. I found the original filing paperwork where my name was listed alongside Vanessa's. I made copies of everything and placed them into a locked folder on my desktop. The next morning, I called my lawyer. His name was Eric Yates, and he'd helped me with my estate planning years ago. "Eric," I said when he picked up, "I need your help. My daughter may be laundering money through our business, and I think she's trying to frame me as the fall guy." That got his attention. "Come in tomorrow. Bring everything you've got." When I arrived at his office the next day, I laid out the entire story. Eric listened carefully, his brow furrowing deeper with each new detail. "This is bad," he said when I finished. "If the IRS catches wind of this and you're still listed as a partner, they'll come after you first. You have the deeper financial history. The paper trail leads to you." "I need to protect myself," I said, "and I need to hold her accountable." He leaned back. "We can file for a temporary injunction to freeze all company assets until we get to the bottom of this. We'll also submit a request to separate your ownership legally. But I'll need access to the full financials. I've already started the audit. Dalton and Green are compiling everything." He nodded. "Good. Once we have that, we'll move." "But Gloria," he hesitated, "are you prepared for what this might mean? This could ruin your relationship with Vanessa forever." I looked him straight in the eye. "There is no relationship. Not anymore." That afternoon, I received an unexpected email. It was from Sylvia Park, the banker. The subject line read, "Urgent. Regard new business account activity." I opened it immediately. Inside was a forwarded email thread between Vanessa and Sylvia. In it, Vanessa was requesting the closure of our joint business account and the transfer of all funds into a new solo account under her name only. The email was timestamped just 2 days after my conversation with Tara. She knew. Vanessa knew I was looking into the finances, and she was trying to cut me out before I could act. My breath caught in my throat, and I realized there was no turning back. I forwarded the email chain to Eric immediately, adding only 3 words in the message: "It's happening now." He called me back within 5 minutes, his voice clipped and urgent. "We're filing the injunction today," he said. "But you need to physically go to the bank now. Show them your ownership papers and request a hold on all account changes pending legal review. If she manages to drain those funds before the order is processed, we might never recover them." I hung up and raced to the branch. I wore the same blazer I used to wear during our early investor meetings, navy blue, sharp-shouldered, a symbol of the woman who had helped launch Nathan Harlow Design from nothing. When I arrived, I asked to speak directly with Sylvia Park. She met me in a private glass office and looked shaken as I explained the situation. I handed her my documentation. "I'm not just her mother," I said. "I'm her business partner. That account cannot be closed without my consent." Sylvia scanned the papers, then turned to her screen. "She requested the transfer yesterday," she murmured. "But the transaction is still pending internal review. We have a policy that changes involving joint accounts, flagged for corporate ownership, must be vetted with both listed partners." She clicked a few buttons, her brows drawing together. "I'm placing a hold on the account right now. Nothing will move until legal clearance is granted." I sagged in relief. "Thank you," I whispered. "You may have just saved my life." On the way out of the bank, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Vanessa. It read, "Did you really think I wouldn't find out what you were doing?" That was it. No greeting, no explanation, just a threat disguised as indignation. I didn't respond. What could I say to someone who saw me as a threat rather than her mother? Eric filed the injunction later that day, and Tara from Dalton and Green sent over the final audit files. The evidence was damning. Margaret's payments weren't gifts, they were bribes, routed through hidden accounts to fund personal expenses and solidify her influence over the business. Vanessa had falsified entries, concealed transfers, and tried to quietly erase my ownership status from internal documentation. What she didn't realize was that as a silent partner, I still had legal rights. And now, I had a legal team ready to assert them. The court date was set for 2 weeks later. In the days leading up to it, Vanessa didn't call, she didn't visit. I received no apology, no explanation, just silence. The night before the hearing, I sat alone in my apartment. The rain tapped lightly against the windows, and I found myself flipping through an old photo album. There was one picture that made me stop. Vanessa at 10 years old, missing her front teeth, proudly holding a science fair ribbon while I knelt beside her. My arm was around her, my face was shining with pride. I remembered every detail about that day. She had built a solar oven out of cardboard and tinfoil, and it barely worked, but she explained the science so sweetly the judges gave her a special mention. We'd gone out for ice cream afterward. She got chocolate, I got strawberry. That little girl had grown up and turned me into an obstacle. I closed the album. This wasn't the child I raised. This was a woman who had made choices. And now, she'd have to answer for them. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and surprisingly quiet. Margaret was there, seated beside Vanessa. She wore a beige designer suit and sunglasses indoors, like someone trying to prove she was above it all. Vanessa looked tired, but composed, her face a cold mask. Nathan was nowhere to be seen. Eric presented the audit findings to the judge, along with my ownership papers and documentation from Sylvia's bank. Tara had submitted a sworn affidavit confirming Vanessa's attempts to conceal financial activity and marginalize my role in the company. Vanessa's lawyer tried to argue that the transfers were personal gifts and that the use of funds was at her discretion. But the judge interrupted him. According to these documents, the funds were deposited into a joint business account. That makes them subject to review, particularly if they're tied to personal enrichment under the guise of business development. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, turning to me, "do you wish to remain involved in the company or remove yourself entirely?" I stood. My hands were steady. "I want to separate my ownership and receive a full buyout of my 25% share based on the company's current valuation," I said. "I no longer trust my partner. I also want a full investigation into the misuse of corporate funds." Vanessa didn't look at me. The judge nodded. "Motion granted. We'll begin valuation proceedings immediately. Additionally, this court recommends a financial ethics review be open regarding the transactions involving Margaret Langford." Margaret stiffened beside Vanessa. For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. Outside the courtroom, I passed by Vanessa without a word. She didn't try to stop me. I got into my cab and looked out the window. My throat burned, but I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to cry anymore. That night, I returned to my quiet apartment and deleted Vanessa's contact from my phone. I didn't want to be tempted to call. Didn't want to hear another half-truth or excuse. The next day, I began looking at small local nonprofits. I wanted to invest my time and, yes, my money into people who valued care and honesty over image and wealth. I spent 2 weeks volunteering at a food pantry, then another at a retirement center where I taught beginner art classes. For the first time in years, people looked me in the eye and thanked me without asking for more. One evening, I received a letter. Handwritten. It was from Nathan. Gloria, it began. I had no idea what Vanessa was doing. I found out too late, and by then I didn't know how to fix it without tearing my family apart. I'm sorry. For everything. If you ever want to talk, I'd like to explain. I set the letter down. I didn't know if I wanted to respond, but it felt like something inside me had shifted. I had been betrayed by the people I loved most, but I had survived. I had protected my legacy. And now, maybe it was time to rebuild something new. A week later, I received a call from Willow Crest Country Club. Mrs. Harlow, the woman on the line said, "We understand you were once a donor to our scholarship fund. Would you consider rejoining our annual board of supporters?" I smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "Yes," I said. "I think I would." But as I hung up the phone, I received another message. This time from Vanessa. And this one would undo everything. The message was just 2 sentences long, but it knocked the air from my lungs. "You think you've won, but you don't know half of what I've done. If you go forward with this, I'll make sure you regret it." I stared at the screen, numb. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the brazenness. This wasn't a desperate daughter begging to mend things. This was a threat. A calculated, deliberate threat from someone who had already proven she was capable of deceit. I forwarded the message to Eric and Tara with the subject line, "Urgent, possible retaliation." Within an hour, Tara had filed for a protective order and flagged the message with the court handling the business separation. "She's spiraling," Eric told me on the phone. "This isn't about money anymore. It's about power and shame. She doesn't want to face the consequences of being exposed. But you're doing the right thing." I wasn't so sure. For days, I couldn't sleep. I checked the locks on my doors twice every night. I kept the curtains drawn. I canceled all in-person meetings and moved my volunteer work to remote tasks. I felt like a fugitive in my own life, hiding from someone I had once cradled in my arms, fed with a spoon, sang lullabies to. My daughter had become a stranger, and now I was afraid of her. A week later, I received another call, this time from my old friend Helen, a retired teacher I'd known for decades. "You need to come to the garden club meeting," she said urgently. "There's something you need to see." I hesitated. "Helen, I haven't been attending those lately. I don't know if I'm up for—" "Gloria," she cut in. "Please, just come." I arrived late, wearing sunglasses and a long coat, still jittery from Vanessa's last message. Helen pulled me aside and handed me a manila envelope. "Someone left this on the table before you arrived. No return address. I checked. It wasn't mailed. Someone dropped it off." Inside were a dozen printed photos. My house. My new apartment. Me entering the food pantry. Me walking through the park. My hands began to shake. "What is this?" I whispered. Helen's face was pale. "I think someone's watching you." I clutched the envelope to my chest and ran. At home, I locked all the doors and sat in silence, staring at the photos under a lamp. They weren't threatening in content, but the message was clear. Vanessa, or someone acting for her, was tracking me, following me, documenting my movements. I called the police and filed a report. The officer was polite, but noncommittal. Unless they've made a specific threat or there's a physical confrontation, this is classified as surveillance, not harassment. It's unsettling, yes, but not illegal. I gave him the photos anyway. I gave him Vanessa's message. "Please," I said, "this is escalating." I didn't hear back for several days. And then one night, I woke up to a sound outside my window, a car idling. I crept to the curtain and peeked through the curtain. A black SUV was parked across the street. The engine was running, but the headlights were off. I stood there watching for 10 minutes, my heart pounding. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it pulled away. The next morning, I called Tara. "I want to end it," I said. "The buyout, the investigation, I want it all wrapped up. I can't keep living like this." She was quiet. "We can expedite the buyout," she said gently. "But Gloria, if we stop the investigation now, we may never get full accountability. You're this close to reclaiming everything they tried to steal. And what good is that if I don't feel safe? What good is truth if I have to live in fear of my own child?" She didn't argue. Instead, she got to work. Over the next 2 weeks, Tara negotiated the final buyout terms with Vanessa's legal team. I would receive my full share of the company, paid out over 6 months. The ethics investigation would continue independently, but I would no longer be the face of it. My name would be removed from all legal motions going forward. It was a bittersweet surrender. I had fought so hard only to step away before seeing justice served. But I needed peace more than I needed revenge. I needed to breathe again. When the final papers were delivered to my door, I read them slowly. I signed each one with a heavy pen, hands steady. The next day, the transfer began. Money I had once invested as a mother now returned to me as a cautionary tale. I made a decision. I used part of the funds to purchase a small cottage in a nearby town. Nothing extravagant, just a cozy 2-bedroom with a rose garden out front. I packed my things, notified the local police, and left my old apartment behind. No forwarding address, no goodbye. I started over. For weeks, I didn't speak to anyone from my past life except Eric and Helen. I planted herbs in the backyard. I adopted an elderly cat from the shelter. I baked scones for the woman at the quilting group down the street. I was anonymous, safe, invisible. Until one afternoon, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find a young woman standing there, holding a folder. She looked nervous. "Are you Gloria Harlow?" I said. Cautiously, she handed me the folder. "I work for a private investigator hired by Mr. Nathan Harlow. He asked me to give this to you." I opened it slowly. Inside were photos, not of me, but of Vanessa, sitting in a cafe with a man in a suit, entering an office labeled Langford Financial Holdings, making withdrawals from multiple bank accounts, notes scribbled in the margins, offshore transfers, unregistered LLCs, suspicious account activity tied to her name. "He had her followed?" I asked. "Not exactly," she said. "He suspected something was wrong, so he hired us to investigate her business dealings after she started avoiding him. He didn't know the extent until recently." I flipped through the folder, nausea rising. "Why are you showing this to me?" "Because Mr. Harlow believes you deserve to know," she said quietly. "He says you were right all along." As I closed the door behind her, I sank to the floor, folder in hand. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, stunned, as the truth I had suspected all along finally took form in black and white. Vanessa hadn't just betrayed me. She had betrayed everyone. But what I didn't know yet was that she was about to betray someone even worse. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Nathan again. This time he called me directly. "I hope you're in a quiet place," he said, "because this isn't going to be easy." I braced myself as he told me what his investigators had uncovered. Vanessa hadn't just embezzled from our company. She had forged his signature on several contracts and funneled money into dummy corporations under her name. But the real bombshell came when he mentioned Sylvia Park. "She didn't just manipulate you," he said. "She manipulated her, too. Sylvia never wanted to sell. Vanessa used your power of attorney signature, fraudulently, and then coerced Sylvia into silence by threatening to leak her private health records to her employer." I sat there frozen, the phone pressed to my ear. But why? Because she wanted full control of the board, Nathan said, and she couldn't do that with Sylvia's vote still active. I remembered Sylvia, sharp, kind, and deeply private. She had been undergoing treatment for early-stage Parkinson's and had confided in me only once. Vanessa must have known. She must have hacked into something or bullied someone into telling her. I felt sick. "Is Sylvia okay?" I asked. "No," Nathan said. "She was terminated from her job 2 months ago. She's been in and out of clinics since." A heavy silence settled between us. "What are you going to do?" I finally asked. "The lawyers are filing criminal charges," he said. "This goes far beyond internal misconduct now. Fraud, coercion, corporate theft. It's a serious case, and I'm naming you as the original whistleblower." "I don't want to be involved," I whispered. "You already are, but I'll protect you." That night, I sat with Sylvia's name echoing in my ears. This wasn't about business anymore. It was about people, about trust broken in the cruelest ways. I reached out to Helen the next morning. "I need to go see someone," I said. "Can you come with me?" We drove to the assisted living center Sylvia was staying in, an hour away, in a quiet neighborhood with cherry blossom trees and wide porches. She looked smaller than I remembered, her hair thinned, her voice softer, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Gloria," she whispered. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I took her hand. I should have come sooner. We talked for an hour. I apologized again and again for what had happened, even though I didn't know the extent of Vanessa's betrayal. Sylvia forgave me instantly. "She always knew you were trying to protect the company," she said. "But I never thought she'd go that far." I didn't tell her about the charges. I didn't want to burden her further. But I promised to stay in touch, to advocate for her from the outside. And I meant it. As I walked back to the car, Helen squeezed my arm. "She's lucky to have you," she said. "Not many people go back to make things right." I thought about that as we drove home. I hadn't been able to save my relationship with my daughter, but maybe I could still do good in other ways. The following week, I received a subpoena to testify in the preliminary hearing. Tara called to prepare me. "You won't be alone," she said. "Eric and I will both be there, and Nathan too. You're not just a witness. You're the reason any of this is coming to light." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a mother still nursing 1,000 invisible wounds. But I agreed to go. The courthouse was a grand building with marble steps and tall glass doors. As I entered, I caught sight of Vanessa seated at the defendant's table. She looked thinner, paler, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. She didn't turn to look at me. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the stand and took a deep breath. Tara had prepped me on what to say, but the words caught in my throat anyway. I looked down at my hands, then up at the judge. I never imagined I'd be standing here, not against an enemy, but against my own child. I told the truth, about the power of attorney, about the lies, about the threat. I kept my voice steady even when my heart trembled. When I finished, there was silence in the room. Then the judge nodded. "Thank you, Miss Harlow. That will be all." As I stepped down, Vanessa's lawyer stood. "Miss Harlow," he said, "would you agree that your daughter once cared for you during an illness, that she provided housing and financial support for several years?" I didn't blink. "Yes. And I would also agree that she used that support as leverage to silence me, isolate me, and steal from me." He didn't ask any more questions. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I kept my head down, but one woman pushed forward. "Miss Harlow, do you feel vindicated?" I paused. "No," I said quietly. "I feel heartbroken." That night, I returned to my cottage and curled up on the couch, the trial echoing in my head. Helen brought over soup. We sat in silence, the television playing softly in the background. Then my phone buzzed. A new message. From Vanessa. It read, "You've ruined me. You were supposed to love me no matter what. You're not my mother anymore." I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I couldn't carry it anymore. I went to bed early. The next morning, I received an update from Nathan. He said, the DA has decided to move forward with full charges. They want to offer her a plea deal, but only if you agree to testify again. I'll do it, I said without hesitation. This wasn't just about me. It was about every person she had hurt, every life she had trampled to climb higher. She had to be stopped. But deep inside, I knew the next chapter would be even harder, because while the court could take her freedom, it couldn't fix what she'd done to my heart. And worse, it couldn't undo what I was about to find in her journals. It was Helen who found the box. She was helping me organize old paperwork when she opened a drawer Vanessa had sealed shut years ago. Inside was a small wooden chest, locked with a cheap clasp. "Do you want to open it?" she asked gently. I nodded, a knot already forming in my chest. The lock snapped easily with a screwdriver. Inside were 3 leather-bound journals, neatly stacked, their spines dated with years I remembered all too well, right after Vanessa had moved me into her house. I picked up the first one and opened to a random page. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, neat, deliberate, too perfect. The entry began with a phrase that made me physically recoil. "Today I practiced detachment." She went on to describe how she had trained herself not to react when I cried, how she would wear earplugs when I called out at night, how she studied power dynamics in caregiver relationships to better manipulate mine. "She's getting weaker," one page read. "Emotionally fragile, easier to redirect. If I continue gaslighting her just a little longer, she'll stop questioning everything." My hands trembled. Helen read over my shoulder and let out a sharp breath. "Gloria, this isn't just cruel, it's calculated." The other journals were worse. One entry detailed how she had coached Margaret to treat me as a dependent servant. "Make it routine," she wrote. "If Mom starts cleaning up after everyone like it's her job, we don't even have to ask anymore. She'll volunteer just to feel needed." Another entry described a plan to use my arthritis diagnosis as a springboard to petition for conservatorship. "Once she's fully in my care legally, I can consolidate the assets. Her voting rights go to me. It's easier than convincing the board." Helen had to take the journals from me. "You can't read any more of this tonight," she said firmly. "It's too much." She was right. I couldn't stop crying. The betrayal was no longer just financial or legal. It was spiritual. My own child had studied me like a subject. She hadn't just hurt me, she had dismantled me piece by piece, treating me like a problem to solve, a barrier to her ambition. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I took the journals to Tara. She read through them in stunned silence. "This changes everything," she finally said. "This is evidence of premeditated emotional abuse. It may not all be criminal, but it's deeply unethical and persuasive to a jury." "Do what you have to," I told her. "Use every word." The trial resumed the following week. This time, Vanessa's plea deal was off the table. The prosecution had the journals entered into evidence. The judge read excerpts aloud, his face growing tighter with each page. Vanessa sat motionless, her hands clenched in her lap. I watched her as the judge repeated her own words back to her. She never once looked up. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored again, but this time I said nothing. I walked straight past them, holding my head high. At home, Helen had made tea and set out warm bread. We sat in the kitchen like we used to in the old days, before everything fell apart. "I think I'm ready to go see Nathan," I said quietly. "We have a lot to talk about." She smiled. "I think he'll be happy to see you." And he was. Nathan met me at the offices of Dalton and Green, ushered me into a private room, and sat beside me like no time had passed. "You were right," he said without preamble, "about everything. I wish I hadn't been." The board has voted unanimously to reinstate your emeritus title. You'll be given full access to all project archives, and your name is going back on the building. It's the least we can do. Thank you, I said, though the words felt too small. Also, he hesitated, there's a proposal I'd like you to read. He handed me a folder. Inside was a new design blueprint, one with a dedicated housing wing for elder women recovering from emotional abuse and financial manipulation. The name of the center? Gloria House. I looked up stunned. You want to build this? We're already funded. I just need your signature to put it in motion. My hands shook as I picked up the pen. Let's do it! That night, I sat in my cottage, the stars clear above the treetops, and let myself feel proud for the first time in years. Not proud of surviving, but proud of speaking, of refusing to disappear, of turning pain into something permanent and good. I still hadn't heard from Vanessa again. Margaret hadn't called either. They had both been served notice of the pending civil case I was filing with Tara's help to recover my financial losses and seek a restraining order to keep them away. I didn't do it to punish them. I did it to finally close the door. Because the real healing, I realized, was not in seeing them punished. It was in seeing myself stand again and again and choose dignity over silence. But even as I settled into my new life, a part of me stayed watchful, because what I didn't know yet, what was still hiding in that last envelope Nathan had given me, was a detail that would unravel everything I thought I had left to protect. The envelope had sat on my dresser for 3 days. Nathan had handed it to me the same afternoon I signed off on the Gloria House project. He'd said only, "You'll want to read this in private." At the time, I thought it was just more documentation, maybe old letters or residual business records I'd forgotten to request back when Vanessa first took control. But something in his eyes, that deep hesitation, had lodged itself in my mind. And on the 4th morning, I finally opened it. There were 2 items inside. The first was a deed transfer, the one Vanessa had submitted when she tried to move the Whitmore property solely into her name. But something was off. I flipped through the notarized pages and saw a signature line labeled Gloria Ellis, my name, dated just 1 month before I was hospitalized. The problem was, I had no memory of ever signing it. The second item in the envelope was a video file burned onto a disc. A yellow sticky note on top read, "Surveillance, February 14." I didn't have a disc player, but Helen did. I called her immediately, and she was at my door within 20 minutes carrying a portable laptop with a drive slot. We sat side by side on my small floral couch while she inserted the disc. The video began grainy and dim, security footage from a notary office. A receptionist stepped out of frame, then came back leading in 2 women, Vanessa and Margaret. But what shook me wasn't their presence. It was the woman between them. She looked like me, dressed like me, moved like me. But it wasn't me. I knew my own body, my own posture. I would never wear lipstick that shade of coral, would never walk so stiffly like someone acting out an impersonation. And yet there, on camera, I sat down, was handed a pen, and signed 3 pages while Vanessa pointed, nodding eagerly. "Oh my God," Helen whispered. "They hired someone to pose as you." "No," I said, my voice hollow. "They coached someone. That woman's name is on file. She's in on it." The fraud was unmistakable. The implications, immediate. I called Tara and told her everything. She arranged a meeting with the district attorney within hours. When we showed them the footage, their faces darkened. "This is criminal identity theft, forgery, real estate fraud," one of them said. "If proven, it's a Class B felony in the state." Vanessa had crossed a line I hadn't even imagined existed. It wasn't just about power anymore. It was about erasure. She had literally tried to erase my identity, and she would have succeeded if Nathan hadn't kept records, if Helen hadn't opened that drawer, if I hadn't fought back. I was shaking, but I wasn't afraid. I was incandescent, furious, alive in a way I hadn't been in years. Because now I knew every instinct I had about my daughter had been correct. Every dismissal of my doubts, every suggestion that I was overreacting or misremembering had been part of a larger gaslight campaign to make me question my very sense of self. "We're filing charges," Tara said flatly, "and this time it won't be a plea deal. This will go federal." News spread fast. By the end of the week, Vanessa's face was on the evening broadcast. Her mugshot appeared beside the headline, "Daughter Arrested in Elder Fraud Scandal." Margaret was listed as an accessory to identity theft. And just like that, the image they had so carefully crafted, the perfect daughter, the respected in-law, shattered on a public stage. I didn't hide from it. I gave one interview to a local anchor who promised to let me speak uninterrupted. "Why come forward now?" she asked. "Because this happens to women like me all the time. We give our lives to our families, and when we're no longer useful, we're discarded. But I'm not disposable, and I'm not ashamed of surviving." My story went viral. Gloria House received donations from around the country. Survivors wrote to me in droves. But the most unexpected call came from someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 20 years, Sylvia Park, the woman I had once trained in architecture back at Nathan Harlow Design. "I saw your interview," she said, "and I need to apologize." I blinked, unsure what she meant. "Back then, I let Vanessa influence me. She said you were declining and that you'd approved the staff cuts. I didn't question it. I should have." "You were young," I said. "You believed what she told you." "Still," she said, her voice cracking, "you didn't deserve what happened. And if you're ever open to collaborating again, I'd be honored." That night, I dreamed of brick and glass, of open light and strong foundations, of women walking into rooms they built themselves. And when I woke, I called Sylvia back. "Let's build something new," I said. The trial date was set for spring. Vanessa pled no guilty, of course, but the evidence was irrefutable. The jury heard her voice in those journals, watched the footage of her impersonator, read the records she falsified. Margaret tried to change her plea at the last minute, but it was too late. They were both convicted, Vanessa for felony fraud and exploitation, Margaret for conspiracy and aiding identity theft. I sat in the courtroom as the verdicts were read, not gloating, not vindictive, just free. And when the judge ordered full restitution, including damages for emotional distress, I finally smiled, because for the first time in years, my name was mine again. My legacy was mine. My future, mine to rebuild, brick by brick. The house on Langford Drive stood empty for 3 months. After the trial, it had been frozen under asset forfeiture, and while Vanessa's legal team filed appeals, the judge was clear. Any property obtained through fraud would revert to me, its rightful owner. The front steps were still painted the soft seafoam color I'd chosen 15 years earlier, back when the house was a dream I had for my daughter, a place for her children to grow up, for holidays to be held, for legacy to live on. Now it looked like a stage set after the actors had fled. Furniture draped in white sheets. Family photos gone. Only the bones remained. I walked through each room slowly, the hardwood groaning beneath me, and paused in the living room where my granddaughter used to play. I ran my hand along the fireplace mantel and let myself feel it all. The loss, the betrayal, the sheer magnitude of everything that had happened. Then I picked up my phone and called Sylvia. "I want to renovate it," I told her. "Turn it into something new." "Same name?" she asked. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Gloria House stays. But this time, it's not a refuge for others. It's a statement. A space for women to relearn how to stand tall after being knocked down." Within a week, Sylvia had gathered a team. Helen volunteered as community coordinator. Tara's firm offered pro bono legal services for any woman who entered our doors seeking help. Even Nathan stopped by, handing me a blueprint with that familiar glint in his eye. "Your original design for the atrium," he said. "It deserved to be built the way you saw it." We gutted the old kitchen, opened the back walls, created reading nooks and art rooms and therapy pods with light filtering glass. And when we opened our doors 3 months later, The line stretched around the block. One of the first women to walk in was older than me, her hands shaking, her shoulders hunched. "They took everything," she whispered. "But I saw you on the news, and I thought maybe I could still start again." We hugged, silent and steady. Because that's what Gloria House was now, not just a building, but a declaration. You are not alone. You are not broken, and you are never too old to reclaim your life. Letters poured in, grants followed, but more than anything, stories. Raw, painful, powerful stories from women across the country who had been cast aside by the people they loved most. And each time I read one, I felt something unbreakable rising in me. Not revenge, not pride, something purer. Restoration. Vanessa's sentencing came that fall. I didn't attend in person. I'd already sat through enough cold benches and hollow apologies. But Helen did, and she called me right after. 5 years, she said. 2 in state prison, 3 on supervised release. Margaret got 18 months. I exhaled. Not relief, not celebration, just clarity. "Thanks for going," I told her. "You're stronger than you think, you know," she said. "You survived what most wouldn't." I looked around the now finished atrium, its ceiling arched with skylights, its walls filled with sunlight and quiet determination. "I didn't survive," I said. "I reclaimed." That winter, I received a letter. Handwritten, shaky. It was from Vanessa. She didn't beg, didn't deny. She simply said, "I don't know how I became the kind of daughter who could do what I did. I'm sorry. I hope one day you'll be able to forgive me." I folded the letter neatly and slid it into a drawer. Because forgiveness wasn't a transaction. It wasn't something she could request like a favor. It was something I'd find in my own time, on my own terms, if ever. But I had peace. That was enough. At the grand reopening of Gloria House, we held a small ceremony. No press, just survivors, friends, and families who believed in second chapters. Sylvia raised a toast. "To Gloria," she said, "to every woman who has been told she's too old, too emotional, too late. You're not. You're exactly on time." As everyone clinked glasses, I felt a hand slip into mine. It was Helen. "You did this," she whispered. I shook my head. "We did." Outside, snow was beginning to fall. Soft and clean and quiet. A blanket over the past. And inside, we were building warmth. Story by story, life by life. I closed my eyes for a moment and thought of the woman that I had once been, the one who shrank herself to please others, who handed over her home and heart for a thankless seat at someone else's table. That woman was gone. In her place stood a builder, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had learned the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away from everything you once built and start again with your own 2 hands. And for the first time in decades, I no longer feared being alone. Because I wasn't. I had me. And I was enough. A year passed. Gloria House thrived, not as a monument to tragedy, but as a living, breathing place of restoration. Women came in with bruised spirits and left with plans, dignity, and hope. We offered workshops in boundary setting, financial literacy, homeownership, and something I hadn't anticipated would be so vital, storytelling. Every Tuesday night, the library room turned into a sacred space where women shared what had been taken from them and how they were taking it back. I always sat quietly at the edge of those circles, notebook in hand, listening, bearing witness. But one night, a younger woman stood up, tears glinting in her eyes, and said, "I only had the courage to leave my marriage because I saw your story online. You don't know me, but you saved me." That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind. I lit the fireplace, poured a single cup of tea, and finally, I let myself cry. Not out of grief, but out of recognition. The kind of tears that fall when your soul exhales. I wrote a letter that night. Not to Vanessa or Margaret or even my younger self, but to the world. A letter I pinned on the bulletin board at the front of Gloria House the next morning. It read, "If you're reading this, it means you've survived. Whatever they took, whatever they tried to convince you you weren't worth, it doesn't define you. You are here. You are worthy. And you still have chapters left to write." 2 weeks later, a publisher called. They'd read the article someone had written about the house, about me, and they wanted to talk about a memoir. I hesitated at first. Did I want to reopen those wounds? To expose everything again? This time to a wider audience? But then I thought of that younger woman on Tuesday night. Of all the ones who might never walk through our doors, but who still needed to know they weren't alone. And I said yes. Writing the book was like building a second home. Each chapter, a beam, each memory, a window. I titled it Blueprint: How I Reclaimed My Life at 70. It hit the bestseller list within weeks. But that wasn't the part that mattered. What mattered were the letters that came in afterward from women in Iowa, in Peru, in small towns and cities telling me, I thought it was just me. One day, standing in the garden outside Gloria House, I felt a presence. I turned. Vanessa was there. Her hair was shorter, grayer, her posture less defiant. We stared at each other through the iron gate. She didn't try to come closer. I'm working at a halfway center, helping women file paperwork, trying to understand who I became. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She said, I won't ask anything of you. I just wanted you to see that I'm trying. I nodded. That was all. She turned and walked away. I didn't feel anger or sorrow or even closure. Just space. Open, necessary space where guilt and shame no longer lived rent-free in my mind. That night, I walked the halls of Gloria House one last time before locking up, paused at the doorways, touched the walls I'd designed, laughed softly at the spot where Helen had spilled paint during renovations. This house had become more than a refuge. It had become proof. Proof that women like me, discarded and underestimated, could not only rise, but build something lasting, something beautiful. And as I stepped outside into the cool night, I looked up at the stars, exhaled, and whispered, thank you. For the pain, for the fire, for the fight, and for the chance to be exactly who I was always meant to be. If you're listening to this now, I want you to remember something. They may take your time, your trust, your title, but they cannot take your voice. They cannot take your will. You are not too old. It is not too late. And your story is not over. So write your next chapter loud, clear, and without apology. And don't forget to subscribe, because the world needs to hear what happens when women like us stop shrinking and start rising.